So you want a retro cafe racer motorcycle in 2024, but you're not quite sure which one to choose. Well, in this video, we'll go through our picks of the best on the market, in price order ascending, and along the way we'll tell you which bike is right for which type of rider. The most affordable price point and also the most accessible in terms of learner licenses is the Yamaha XR 125. I tried this one out a couple of years back on the launch, and I thought it was a really nice bike for a 125 with a level of attention to detail and quality to the finish that you don't always find at this end of the market. 15 horsepower, of course, is never going to knock your socks off, but it's still a really fun little bike to ride on the road, and you get your satisfaction from pinning it wide open wherever you go, as opposed to face-melting acceleration. I also really like that it's not too low in the seat height as many beginner-friendly bikes can be, and so at 815mm in the seat, it still has a bit of that big bike feel to it. Now, while you might not think it's a cafe racer style bike straight away, if you do delve into the accessories catalogue, you can find a front fairing for around 200 quid, and it does give it a little bit of a resemblance to the bikes of yesteryear. At £4,802, this is the bike I'd go for if I was on a tight budget, or if I was on a learner license but wanted something that looked cool. Next on the list, we have the Continental GT from Royal Enfield at £6,599, which I think is great value for money considering what you get. This is a 650 parallel twin with a 270-degree crank, and so while it doesn't necessarily make a huge amount of power at 47 horses peak, it more than makes up for it with character and air-cooled soul. In fact, I think it's probably the bike on the list that feels the most authentically retro, and they've absolutely nailed it in the styling department too. The spoke wheels on some of the bikes, the stretched out fuel tank, the bench seat, the seat cowl that's available as an accessory, all combine for something that I think a non-biker could easily confuse with a genuine cafe classic. The only thing that some riders might not get on with is the more sporty riding position with a pair of clip-on style bars that get you a little low and over the front, and whilst it isn't the most aggressive cafe position on the list, it's still significantly less comfy than the upright equivalent, which is the Interceptor 650. Still, if you can get yourself into a cafe style tuck, then I reckon this is a great shout if you want something that more closely resembles something from the 60s or 70s. At £7,699 though, another great option is the Suzuki SV 650X, which basically takes their proven and pretty much legendary 650 platform and gives it a slight styling update that makes it look a little bit more cafe-esque, along with some clip-on style bars for that more sporting rider triangle. Now, admittedly, it's certainly not the most authentic looking bike on the list, with a bit of a mix of modern and some more traditional little touches, but what you do get in this bike is a peach of a 650 V-twin that makes 71 horsepower peak, along with a fairly slender 200 kilogram wet weight that should combine for plenty of fun out on the road. In fact, the SV is such a proven sporty workhorse that you'll see them at track days all over the world in various states of modification, and so if you want something with a little bit of retro style, but underneath is fundamentally a great bike to ride without too much compromise, then this is certainly one to demo. Now, perhaps my favourite looking bike on the list is the new Moto Goodsy V7 Stone Corser, which was announced at the back end of 2023 to go on sale for the 24 model year. It's not particularly fundamentally different to the V7s that have gone before it, with the same transverse V-twin that makes about 65 horsepower, the same steel cradle frame, and a lot of the same fundamentals like the wheels, suspension and brakes. But what you do get is this beautiful styling package that gives it plenty of that cafe racer vibe, with a little fairing, seat cowl, bar and mirrors, and a fantastic paint job that helps it to look a touch more racy than the other bikes in this lineup. I'd also say, like the Enfield, that this signature V-twin engine does give you some of the sensation that you're riding an older bike, and Moto Gudsys deservedly have a bit of a cult following for the way that they feel out on the road. Granted, it's a little bit more pricey than the Enfield, but certainly one to look at if you like that sort of vibe, but with a bit more Italian flair to it. Now, it has to be said, the cafe racer niche has died off a bit over the past few years, perhaps being more of a passing fad bad than some of the other retro segments like Scramblers. So while some of these bikes that I'm gonna cover are relatively recent, you might have to delve into the used market to pick one up, as a few have been discontinued. The Kawasaki W800 Cafe was dropped a few years back now, but at £9,099 when it was new, it was a great option, again if you wanted something air-cooled and authentic, like the Enfield or the Moto Goodsy. I wouldn't say you get quite as much performance with this bike for your money at 47 horsepower peak, combined with a relatively hefty weight of 223 kilograms wet, and it also has flat and high bars as opposed to the more traditional cafe-style clip-ons, but with a little fairing up front, it has some of the style and perhaps with a touch more sat-up comfort. At the much more sporting end of the spectrum though, there's also the BMW R90 Racer to consider. Again, discontinued I think owing to not really selling that many, but it has to be said, this is another of the best looking bikes on the list, and it has all the hallmarks of a modern cafe racer. From the air-cooled boxer twin that you'll find in the other R90 bikes, you get a very healthy 110 horsepower, which makes this bike actually pretty quick. Also, it rolls on decent quality componentry, and so you get in a bike that turns and stops well too. But ultimately, I think the comfort levels, which are pretty low on this bike, eventually saw it wound up, being pretty low at the front, which can give you a bit of backache after a couple of hours. Such a shame, as it really does look good with that fairing and seat cowl, and especially in the typical BMW paint job, but still, definitely have a look around on the used market, especially if you like the sound and feel of a boxer twin. For similar money though, you could also look at the Kawasaki Z900 RS Cafe, which makes very similar power at 109 horses, although it will give you a completely different delivery owing to the fact that it's an inline 4. I absolutely love the naked version of this bike, which I've been lucky enough to borrow on numerous occasions, and not only is it a bike that feels great out on the road, but also it's got bags of curb appeal with beautifully sculpted looks that reference the iconic Z1 of the 1970s. It's a real conversation starter, especially in the quite bling-looking SE spec, but also there was previously available until it was discontinued this cafe version, which I think also looks rather good with the mini fairing up front. Now I'm not quite sure why they stopped this one, as it doesn't seem drastically different to the standard bike, and you'd have thought they could perhaps keep offering the cafe fairing as part of the accessories catalogue, but again, presumably they just weren't selling enough, as that's what usually does it, and so you'll have to look at the used market to pick one up. Definitely though, the one you should be looking at if you're a fan of a Revy inline 4, as it's the only one on this list. At £10,995 though, you could also consider the Ducati Scrambler Night Shift, which is one of 3 models that was refreshed for the 2023 model year. You can either choose from the base Icon model, which is the most similar to the original Ducati Scramblers of the 60s and 70s, or there's a full throttle version which is said to have taken its inspiration from the flat track scene. But I think for me, the best looking and probably the most old school has to be the Night Shift, with the spoke wheels, bar end mirrors, a retro seat cover, and all finished off with this beautiful Night Shift paint job. Now I wouldn't say that this is necessarily the most cafe looking bike on the list, but it does get the flattest bars of the bunch, and so it'll give you a little bit of that low down riding position, and I think generally the overall aesthetic will probably appeal to anyone looking for a cafe-style bike. These Scramblers are really good, fun back road bikes that you can chuck around a bit, and at 191 kilograms wet and 795 millimeters in the seat, they're also really quite approachable. So definitely take one of these for a spin if you like the idea of something with a premium level of finish, but also want something that's not too intimidating out on the road. Now a new bike for 2024 comes in the form of Yamaha's XR900 GP, and we're starting to get into the serious money here at £12,500. Thing is though, I'd argue it's not too bad considering what you get, with 117 horsepower made from the same CP3 triple-cylinder engine as you'll find in their MT09 naked bike. You also get a fairly slender 200 kilogram wet weight, especially the sort of power levels we're talking here, and also a proper sporty riding position with an 835mm seat height that means you're a little bit tail up, as well as having some clip-on style bars in the cockpit so you can tuck in behind the half fairing. You've also got the same TFT display as the MT09 naked, and that pulls in some more modern features than you'll find on other bikes bikes on this list, as well as a fairly comprehensive tech package with all the rider aids and modes that you should need. So effectively what you're getting here is a wolf in trendy sheep's clothing. I'm sure you can see that the paint job is massively inspired by the Marlboro race bikes of the past, and while this isn't sort of 60s or 70s cafe racer territory, with that riding position, the half fairing, the seat cowl, it sort of feels like Yamaha's own interpretation of the format, and for me, it really works. This is probably the best recommendation on the list in terms of the thrill seeker's choice, and if you want to make it look even more sporty, there's a racer kit that gets you fairing lowers for a fully faired but retro sort of vibe. Now, I mentioned earlier that a lot of these bikes have been discontinued, and another that's recently fallen victim, and this is a big one as it's probably the default recommendation in the segment, is the Triumph Thruxton RS. The reason that this bike is so good is because of the beautiful Bonneville parallel twin, which has one of the nicest characters on the market, but also combines it with almost modern-day performance at well over 100 horsepower and with bags of torque. Then you've got top-notch componentry from the likes of Öhlins and Brembo, as well as a geometry that's really set up to handle like some of their more modern roadsters. Then it's all wrapped up in a design package which I think absolutely nails that classic cafe racer shape for the modern day. The only couple of downsides are the weight, which is a little bit on the hefty side at well over 230 kilos, but you don't really notice it too much out on the road, whereas you do notice the cramped riding position with the high and rear set pegs and some of the lowest clip-on bars on this list. And so I think that's probably why a lot of people opt for one of the other many bikes in the lineup like the T120 or the Speedtwin 1200, even if this bike is in some ways more desirable. So rounding off its existence for 2024, they're selling the final edition, which is beautifully finished with some special edition logos, and so this could be your last chance to own one of the best examples of how to do the whole modern cafe thing, providing you're willing to do regular yoga classes in order to develop the required levels of flexibility. Topping the list though in terms of price, we've got the beautiful Norton Commando 961 CR, which I think actually can run the Triumph close in terms of the looks, and in some ways has a bit more of that handcrafted, luxurious feel that helps it to justify the extra £3,000 or so on top. Thing is though, it's nowhere near as punchy out on the road with a peak power of just 77 horses, and so I suppose this bike is more so about exclusivity and the way it looks, as well as the brilliant sound at the exhaust, as opposed to the track levels of sporting ability. This bike comes in either the flat-barred SP model or the CR, which as you can imagine stands for Cafe Racer, and this is the one with the clip-on style bars that will get you into a tuck. Perhaps it's a little bit of a shame that there's no fairing as well as an accessory, but still a great looking machine nonetheless. For 2024, there are some limited editions that celebrate 125 years of the Norton name, with a few different paint jobs that are inspired by iconic Norton bikes throughout that time. My pick of the bunch has to be the 588, which takes its inspiration from the rotary race bikes of the 80s and 90s, and having seen it recently in the flesh at the London Motorcycle Show, I can confirm it looks every bit as good as it does in the pictures. My overall pick of the bunch though, well, the new XR900 GP definitely looks like it'll be an absolute hoot to ride, but I think if I had the cash in my bank right now, I'd still have to go for the Thruxton for more of that big twin soul, and given that they won't be on sale much longer, I think it would be a very cool bike to have in the garage. As always though, I'd love to know your pick down in the comments below, so do let us know, and I'll also leave my full lowdown on the screen now of that Thruxton final edition, so you can give it a click and give it a watch in case you haven't already. Also, hit subscribe if you haven't already to see more of the latest motorcycle news like this right here on YouTube. Many thanks for watching today, and we'll catch you in the next video.